fans, welcome one, welcome all to another episode of Flippin the Birds.
He's into the end zone. Touchdown, Eagles.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome one, welcome all. As our friend Brian says, obviously he's not here tonight. You're stuck with myself. You're stuck with Eric Reese here to talk another week of Birds football. So appreciate everybody other than Ron for being patient with us.
Yeah, Ron.
I had some tech difficulties getting everything set up after Sixers practice today. So, you know, we're getting back into the swing of it here. So anyway, we're here to talk some Birds football. Obviously a lot to talk about on the Eagles front. Not a lot overly exciting, I would say, but things that get people excitable. You know, obviously some passionate subjects, that we have to go through today. I think, and Eric, if you feel differently, speak up. But
okay,
I want to start. I before we get to the bullshit, like, because there's plenty of it. Like, before we get to the nonsense, like, let's just talk about the game itself at first. How does that sound?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to get into here. So I was going to say to you, like, hey, where do you want to start and what do you want to talk about? So we should probably get into the meat potatoes of the game here.
Yes.
What did you see as far as, let's just start on how we normally do offensive side, defensive side, things like that. What did you see on the offensive side of the ball that you liked? Because from what I was able to see is the weapons are home. You got Brown back, we got Smith back, and both of them have touchdowns. It's no coincidence. I don't know that the team is any better than quote unquote, like how I said a week ago, mediocre. Obviously they need these weapons, and I think it was very apparent. And it just didn't sit right with me that you only beat the Browns by 4 when their only touchdown came from, a special teams block of a field goal.
Yeah, as we have Brian checking in up to some kind of nonsense over here. I mean, for me, obviously getting AJ and Devontae was huge, like you said. The loss of Dallas early on in the game, that was obviously that was a blow there. But to have AJ back was huge for the whole team, for the Eagles, for Jalen especially. Obviously, there's that connection that is. It's not just the fact that you have two, like, at their peak quality, like 2 star guys at their peak, and we can talk about how Hurts has played as of late, but we've seen his peak, and his peak's obviously super impressive. But to have a guy like AJ back, who not only he has that relationship with on the field but off the field, immensely big for Jalen. I understand that the offense underwhelmed in terms of the points they put on the board, and there's still a lot to work out there. But it was encouraging to see the team not cough the ball up, to see Jalen not cough the ball up. And it's a Browns team that's not very good, but the team is good when they blitz. So, and by that I mean they're good at blitzing. So, an area that has been such a weakness for Jalen Hurts in the past, he did fine against on this past Sunday. So, for that, like, I think that there should be some positivity talked about, because there's not going to be a lot as we go on. But, for the fact that the offense looked, for the most part, improved, I feel relatively good about the performance of the offense on the field this past Sunday.
As I unmute myself, I think one of the big things that we kind of had to look at going into this game is just how Hurts stacked against quarterbacks with 4 max starts, which puts them on an even playing field with a lot of with certain quarterbacks. Because we're not going to sit there and compare a guy that's played in 4 games with a guy that's played in 5 games. Obviously, the stats will be either worse or better in comparison. We want to sit here and put them on an even playing field against the guys who have started the same amount of games. A lot of what I saw in comparing those stats is that basically Jared Goff had pretty much better stats than Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts was still at the top of those rankings of the guys who started 4 games going into obviously that week 5 and obviously picking up in week 6. So as that goes, and what I mean by that is Jalen Hurts ranked going into, by the way, this game of all quarterbacks with 4 max starts. Jalen Hurts was first in completions, second in pass yards. He had a 13.8 bad throw percentage, which ranked last amongst all quarterbacks with 4 starts. He was on target 77.2% of the time, which I think is impressive when you consider that you didn't have A.J. Brown, you missed Devonta Smith, and you basically only had Dallas Goedert for the most part. He was sacked the second most times, 13, but I think that comes down to, you did miss Lane Johnson, so he didn't really have a fully healthy. And by the way, now, what might happen with Jordan Mailata, you kind of do have the banged up offensive line. And then you also have, and Jalen Hurts is scrambling quarterback. Now, granted, does he hold on to the ball for too long? Yeah, but I think that has a lot to do, again, with him not having the weapons to get the separation. Now that he does have the weapons to get separation, if you look at what went down in this game, he was sacked once. He was sacked once for an 8-yard loss and never turned the ball over. And his, quarterback rating was probably, without really, going back that far, is probably the best that we've seen all year. Now, people will say, well, it's the Browns. The Browns' pass defense, not bad. The Browns' offense, horrendous. So we're not talking like it's night and day difference in that kind of comparison. Jalen Hurts is facing kind of to what you were saying as far as the blitzes is concerned. He's pressured the second most out of those quarterbacks who had 4 starts going into this week. So on the same playing level, 25.6%. When you look at that, kind of pressure and what Jalen Hurts is facing with the team that he had around him for a while. And by a while, I mean like 2 to 3 weeks, which is long in the NFL, I think. I don't think that a lot of the blame here goes on Jalen Hurts. And I think that by Brian, talking about the podcast in itself, hit it right on the head last week. It's, maybe we should not be looking at Jalen Hurts, Kurt Warner, and maybe we should be looking at probably a lot of the coaching around him. So I want to go into this week. You see that Brown, he's doing his thing. He's running a lot of those, go routes. That's kind of, what he does. He has a big enough of a body to do so. But at the end of the day here, everybody in the chat's talking about Smith and how that pick play across the middle got him wide open for a yards after catch phenomenon of a touchdown. What do you think really is the issue with this offense? Is it Hurts, which I don't think, or is it is it still more so on the coaching and do you think it has more to do with Sirianni, which is an ongoing week to week conversation, or do you think it has to do with more?
Yeah, I think it's still kind of a collection of things. I think that there is clearly a top issue that's affecting this team. And I don't think it's day-to-day coaching. I don't think it's Jalen Hurts. I think it's the scheme that's in place, right? It's something that just is not overly conducive for your receivers. You're not playing to their strengths. And I understand that A.J. Brown can win on a deep route. He's got that kind of like TO ability to just, to race down the field past a guy and fight that guy for the ball. And we saw that obviously the deep ball wasn't great for Hurts this past Sunday, but they did connect on a deep route. And I think that the way that Philadelphia finds success would be by putting Jalen Hurts in a position to succeed. And so what does that look like? People talk, well, why is Jalen Hurts continuing to play from the shotgun? Why isn't he playing under center? And you listen to Kellen Moore speak today, and you listen to him talk about Hurts as a runner, the opportunities to utilize him as a runner out of shotgun. I understand that. I get that. But two things about that. One, you can't almost purely run him out of shotgun because that gets rid of the threat completely of him playing under center, which in turn gets rid of the threat of him playing play action, which in turn gets rid of the threat of him rolling out right after the snap and then being able to take advantage of the open field once the play begins to develop, once those routes begin to develop, once you get some of those defenders further downfield, and again, open up that space for him to run and open up those running lanes, right? So you can't just say putting him in shotgun gives him the best opportunity to run, and that's the reason why we do that. Because there are so many ripple effects from that decision to play so much shotgun that you're ignoring those other factors, and you're just saying, well, he's in more of a position to run, and he can run, so it's a better way for him to run. Like, no, that's not exactly how that works. And I don't know if I had to guess, and I want to be clear, I'm guessing at this part. If I had to guess, and part of this is by looking at the offense and the scheme. The general scheme, the general play design is Sirianni's. A little bit more of the fine details, that's Kellen Moore. That's how you get a little bit more motion than you've seen in past years. This past Sunday did not have a lot of motion.
I agree.
Moore is operating within Sirianni's offense effectively, right? And so that's how you get. I don't think Kellen Moore, if Kellen Moore were the head coach, or if he were the unquestioned offensive coordinator of this team, I don't think that you would have that same answer about running the ball out of shotgun or snapping the ball out of shotgun, right? Because it's to me, it doesn't make enough sense. And just by following Moore for the years that I have, even when he was back in the league, he's a smarter guy than to think that that's the actual reason, or that logic follows, I should say. So for me, that's the biggest focus is like, well, we're kind of, you're cutting off your nose to spite your face, right? So you have this guy in here who is, people look at him as a potential head coaching candidate because of his offensive prowess as a coach, but you're not allowing him to actually utilize the offense in a way that suits his talents as a caller, as a play caller. And at the same time, you're organizing an offense that doesn't best suit the needs of Jalen Hurts or best reflect his abilities as a two-way quarterback, right? And on top of that, again, with the routes and the receivers and not playing under center, not using play action pass, like these are all things where you're overly, and the term is vanilla, I think Brian used a lot last year. This overly, and if you look at the route trees, they're just disgusting. They are so plain, they're disgusting. When you look at that overly simplistic offense, it's just not. You can understand why this offense continues to have trouble, and you can understand why this offense takes a while to get going, right? And that's been the consistent complaint. They don't have a single first quarter point, which is insane at this point in the season. Like, so for a team like the Eagles, who they expect to be Super Bowl contenders, for them to right this ship, this is what makes me believe that you really can't do it this year. You can't just implement a brand new offensive scheme in the middle of the year. Like this isn't Madden. This isn't like you switch over to another menu and you can call a completely different play design. Like the playbook is the playbook. Right. Now, what you can do is you can situationally call different plays. And that's what I would encourage this offense to do. And part of that is utilizing Saquon more. A lot of people want to, talk about, well, ground and pound, run the ball, ground and pound. I don't think that's the perfect answer because you're paying these wide receivers what you're paying them. But I will say, get a little better flow to the game. Script the plays better, especially to begin the game, right? So utilizing Saquon on first down is obviously huge. And then let your plays play off of one another. It just kind of feels like there's not a whole lot of rhyme or reason to what's being called and why. But that's what I've noticed with this offense. Tell me what you feel there.
When you say that the and stop me if I interpret this incorrectly, but when you say that the scheme is more so a Sirianni scheme, how much of this is 95% new then? Because if it's a Sirianni scheme, and what we're seeing is very, almost retrospective of last season with maybe just a little bit more motion, then it's not necessarily different. It's just, maybe we'll use this guy because he's in motion, but that's like we're just going to do the same thing we did last year. It shouldn't be an eye-popping thing when you have a receiver running across the middle. That should be a football thing that most teams do because it just makes sense. You got to create space. You got to shake it up a little bit. When you see, Brown kind of running these go routes and it's working great, but also, what's the difference? Well, I don't want to put this kind of, this kind of like Hall of Fame on Brown. It's going to be sounding like way too homerish, but with the way that he's built, he's kind of improvising and making Hurts look a little bit better in the deep game, because it's kind of hard to, I'd imagine, as a corner to defend against AJ Brown, who's in my eyes is built like an Andre Johnson, who's built like a Calvin Johnson, built like one of those guys. To me, I don't know how much of this offense is, and I'm not really willing to put it on Hurts, because I'm reading off these stats to you, and this is, missing out on his weapons, and honestly, it doesn't sound bad. So I think Hurts is doing fine with what he has to work with, but I think it's what he has to work with that's, dragging the team down. And I don't see the Kellen Moore influence as much as it says 95% new, right? These were the quotes that we were presented with at the beginning of the season. And by the way, you guys, this is how many running backs do we bring in with this anticipation, and then it's just they're not utilized? I mean, this is Saquon Barkley. All right, Saquon Barkley's stat line in this game right here. Let's talk about, how my computer catches up with me real quick. 18 carries. Okay, so he's getting 18 carries, 47 yards. Now that's not a good stat line for a guy who is as explosive as, as we all sit here to say to be. So how vanilla, like you were saying, or even the run plays, or if he's not working under center, how much are they expecting, these draws and handoffs anymore? Because to me, it's kind of tipping the plays, kind of like how a pitcher tips the pitches and then gets whacked over the head with it. You're kind of tipping the plays because the formations you're coming out of is saying, hey, we're probably not going to stick to this, even though we can balance this out and keep you guessing, working off the plays like you were saying. It's just not what you're seeing from Philadelphia, and that's just the offensive side of things.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, even if it is, as far as like the tipping pitches idea, right? I would say that at the very least, the absolute very least, with how vanilla your offense is, you're limiting that variable aspect for the defense, right? So you're maybe not telegraphing the specific play, but you're letting them know, hey, we're not going to be running crossing routes, at least for the majority of the game. So you don't have to protect the middle as much, right? Hey, and you can even kind of look at this, I think, a little bit on both sides, when you talk about how that defense is best suited. But when you're talking about the offense specifically, like, you run a second safety over the top over AJ Brown, like, and you handcuff this offense. Like, that is
right.
We didn't see that in this past game, which Cleveland's not obviously there's a lot going wrong in Cleveland, and I think it starts with the quarterback with them, but there's a lot of issues. And I think, for as much credit as Jim Schwartz has gotten over his career, he did not have his best game on Sunday. But, you think, like, just run that safety over the top with A.J. Brown. And then what do you have? Because you're not running Devontae over the middle. You have a guy like Ward. Denzel Ward is a great cornerback.
Yes.
To have a guy like him on Devontae Smith, that obviously makes an impact. That makes a difference. They're down Dallas Goedert. They're not overly utilizing. And again, like, they've given the ball to Saquon a lot. My bigger issue is that they've been inconsistent when and situationally how they give the ball to him. I want to see a bit more consistency there. I don't necessarily want to see him run into the ground. I feel that if you get that proper cadence to your offense from the start, you can even introduce more Kenny Gainwell to the game and he would have success, and Saquon would have success in his rushing attempts as well. So, for me, the bigger thing is not, we need to utilize and lean on one of these specific stars. The bigger thing is we have to get a little bit of variety in this offense, and we have to get a little bit of rhythm into this offense and start getting guys a little bit more comfortable and a little bit more confident to make plays as they do. So I do want to take a quick moment, just check in with a couple people in the chat. Got a great group here today. Martian Lynch checks us in. Martian, I will say Hurts is an issue still. Absolutely still an issue. I just don't think that he is the biggest. Ron's here. Ron, we already acknowledged Ron. We don't need to keep going on with Ron. What's up, Dame? Good to see you, man. Davey, good to have you here. And I understand this point here that Jalen doesn't want to play under center. I have heard that before from speculators, and that counts,
Right.
media personnel as well. I don't want to sound curt. I don't care. Like, there's a certain point where if you're talking about the betterment of the team and the success of the offense, and let me phrase this by the reason why I'm saying that is that I feel that with a guy like Nick Sirianni, a player's coach type, that player X isn't as comfortable doing this or doesn't want to do this. I think there's possible truth to something like that, and that terrifies me. Right, so that's we're going back into issues about Sirianni. We'll have a whole night to talk about Sirianni. Don't you worry about that. I know Duck is ready and raring to go talking about Nick Sirianni. Desert Fox checks in. Hurts still stinks. He was better. The first 5 was a little rough, a little shaky.
I don't see that.
It was a little shaky.
I think he is, since he's the quarterback and he's in the Philadelphia market, that he's going to get so much of the the heat here. I don't see that. I don't see that Hurts is a bad quarterback. I think Hurts is for sure. He's got and it makes a total difference, by the way, when Brown and Smith are gone versus when they're here. I've said that for
sure.
when they were gone, and I'm saying it today when they're back. But at the end of the day here, if you look at those numbers, he's not bad. He's got to play with a limited toy box. When the best toys are out there and you really don't want to play with any of the toys, you had one Goddard game, and then, if you're, by the way, Zach, when you said you got to get a little bit more versatile, shout out to Calcaterra. That's how I look at this week, because when it wasn't Brown, when it wasn't Smith, it was Calcaterra. How many times outside of this week could you say was ever Calcaterra?
Well,
even as a third
been more
guy.
of a theory than production, and then he was production this past Sunday, so you got to give him credit for that. The one thing that I will say about Hurts, I think that he is, by his own standard, mind you, having a bad season. I don't think that he is a bad player. I don't think this is Carson Wentz 2.0. I think the issues that he's having are fixable, and I think that Sunday was a good step forward to fixing some of those issues, namely turnovers. Now, there's still a lot more to figure out. Obviously, pocket presence, as Steve mentioned, I do think that is an issue. I think moving in the pocket is poor. I also think, and this is partly schematic, but they are not like you gotta. And actually, so they're far from the only team that have this issue. So I have a Giants friend, not Brian, a different one, who is or Giants fan.
By the way, for anybody running with this idea that Brian is actually a Giants fan and it rents space on your show, no, it is not. Thank you.
It is a gag, a long-running gag that a lot of people here are in on,
and it will continue to be a long-running gag because it's funny.
We have had it be an issue where somebody has perhaps taken it a bit too serious, but no, like effectively, my point that I'm getting towards is that you watch the New York Cincinnati in this last game, and you have a guy like Daniel Jones, and I'm not trying to compare Hurts and Daniel Jones. Hurts is a much better quarterback than Daniel Jones. But when you do think about the fact that they are both athletic runners, you have this shared commonality where both teams, you can see they're just not rolling their guys out properly, right? So the Giants, honestly, it's as simple as move the pocket, right? Or it's as simple as running the guy out on a bootleg while the route tree is developing, right? And these are things that you're not really seeing out of Jalen Hurts. And part of it was difficult this past Sunday. Obviously with the Jordan Mailata injury, you had Fred Johnson eventually, at first move there, and then I think eventually Lane Johnson switched to left tackle, and then Fred was playing right tackle. So there's a lot of shifting around going on there, and we know that's one thing that the Eagles don't love to do, is to move multiple guys on the offensive line, right, at a position anyway. So with that all being said, I do think that there is a path to Jalen Hurts continuing to get better, continuing to improve back to the quarterback that we've seen in years past. I don't think this is, the league figured him out and now he's done. For me, it's just he has to continue working on these very fixable issues, and ideally the offensive scheme stops undermining him and allows him to do such. So that's my biggest thing. So as far as where to go from here for this offense, you're going to have to take it bit by bit, week by week. I don't think that magically they're going to come out against the Giants and score. I mean, I would hope they'd score 30 points against this Giants team, but I can't say magically they're going to score 35, 40 points, anything like that. I just don't think that's the way this team's going to be. I think you're going to be looking at kind of improvements bit by bit and hope by the end of the season.
Yeah, I mean, especially with, I would like to say that I wanted a boom game against the Browns and hopefully, 25, 30 points there because it's the Browns. Or I wanted at least a runaway. If it's going to be 20, then make it 20-9 or something like that, or 20-6. And it probably could have been that, a blocked field goal is the only reason why they have a touchdown. I think that speaks highly, by the way. This is my next point about the youth of this defense. The defense here,
you keep talking about the defense. You introduce the defense. I'm already at the point I got to break open the Bird Gang. So
okay, go ahead.
We're going to be moving on there. I was saving it for Sirianni, but I'm kind of already there.
I liked what I saw from the young guys on this defense. I understand that there are a lot of things to fix up here, but this is a defense that otherwise you're hoping that they would kind of step into kind of an identity, right? And you got to take that as they develop. It wasn't ever going to be a defense that you're going to sit there and write home and say, oh man, they're going to be good this year. We were hoping that they would be good this year. I think we're seeing what they are, but I also saw just in this game right here that in other times there would be a bad offense that looks great, or at least good. And this time around, I don't think they looked great or good. I think they looked just like the Browns, and that's a start for me. If a team that's bad can look as bad as I thought they would, against our defense, then to me that just says, hey, these younger guys are coming to play and they mean business. That's just what it shows. I loved Cooper DeJean flying around the field. Now, part of what I didn't like, and even though he had 2 passes defended, I saw a lot of times I'm going to sit here and I'm going to drag him down again. But Gardner Johnson was ball watching. Some of the times there was times where the play happened in front of him, and he just didn't go ahead and make a tackle. He just kind of let it go. By the way, and I'm not going to sit here, and this is more of a gag at this point, Zach, but your boy had a half a sack.
You got to clarify at this point. There's so many.
Okay. Your boy.
Are you talking Huff?
Yeah, he had a half a sack.
So I noticed that. He has more stats than Greg Ward at this point. You're right.
He has more stats than Hassan Reddick at this point.
Well, that's also true. That's all. I mean, for now, that Hassan to Detroit train is going to hit like crack.
One of the funny things there is Marshawn Lynch, 33 over there. Deshaun was 10 for 10 at one point. Do you not remember when Andy Dalton had like the game of his career? None of this is new. That's the way that this defense has always been for the past 2 years, at least.
Yeah, that's bend, don't break.
That's what it is. So for you to sit there and say 10 for 10, let's, what was his average throwing yards? under, like short distance to medium distance, yeah, he should be completing those.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at, how, whether you want to look at Deshaun specifically, in his entire season or what, like you look at him throughout, and his other matchups, he's at least scoring a touchdown. I mean, against Washington, he had a touchdown. Against the Giants, he had a touchdown. Against the Raiders, he had a touchdown. I mean, we're talking about bend, don't break. Like that. What is, giving up 10 for 10 and not a touchdown, if not bend, don't break. Against the Cowboys, he had a touchdown. The only other team, and not that this is an example, that game against the Jaguars was an absolute mess. But
yes,
like there's only been one other game this season that Deshaun Watson's not had a passing touchdown. So like I'm not here to say that Deshaun's this great quarterback that
he's not.
Oh, the Eagles deserve so much praise for keeping him out of the end zone. But you can't, like, with respect, Marshall Lynch, you can't be throwing 10 for 10 out if there's no results. Like, are we going to be happy if Jalen Hurts throws 10 for 10 and no touchdowns? Like, he has no touchdowns? Like,
I mean,
no, we wouldn't be happy about that. So,
on the flip side of that,
for me, it's a non-argument.
On the flip side of that, kind of to what you were saying, Hurts started cold and then ended up, finding his
for
rhythm.
5 and won the game.
Right. And then, Duck over here, and I'm going to say this real quick. Trotter Jr. had a roughing call in his 1 of 4 snaps. Okay, you can focus on that negative. I'd like to look at Nakobe Dean, who had 12 total tackles. We were trying to figure out what he was about. Nakobe Dean had 12 total tackles.
Yeah.
Zach Vaughn, still making those tackles too. Cooper, 6 tackles, a quarterback hit and also a half a sack. I'm seeing these things as it's not obviously a finished product. It's not anything to sit there and say, oh, this is going to be a staple of what it's going to be in the future. But I'm saying right now that at least there's something to talk about. At least there's something to go off of. There's a baseline.
Whew, it's got some bite on the back end.
I bet it does.
It's you talk about Dean, and I think overall, very good game. You remember, maybe this is the Negadelphia in me, but you so often
seems to be a lot going around.
when you're a customer and you go somewhere, right? Yeah, how often are you going to remember the good experiences versus the bad, right? So for me, watching Nakobe Dean, the play that's stuck in my head and is continuing to replay rent free is that horrendous missed tackle that resulted in Keely Ringo almost ending a man's life. Again, that play has a bright side to it as well, which was that straight up Asante, just assault of a hit that Keely Ringo laid. Whereas
was that the one along the sideline there that he kind of stood over him?
It's exactly the same. Nakobe Dean horrendously missed a tackle in that spot.
That's fair.
That being said, it was it was a mixed bag for him, and he did have a lot of success as well. But for me, when you talk to Nakobe Dean, that's the play that sticks out to me. But part of it also is just that I was impressed by what I saw from Keely Ringo when Darius Slay left the game with injury, which I think is a notable thing that should be talked about. I don't know what Slay's future is in Philadelphia. I don't expect him to be traded. I don't know how. I don't even believe he's going to miss time with this injury unless you had heard otherwise. But just from the way that I've seen him walking around, he's clearly in good spirits. Back on the Micah Parsons podcast, but you have a guy like Slay, a veteran, a captain, in badge. He has the C on his chest anyway. But you have a guy like Darius Slay. I don't think Keely's going to completely replace him, but I feel pretty good if they do end up making a move in some capacity, or at the very least, just about the future of this defense. Because you talk about really the future generation of corner in Philadelphia, and you have Mitchell, Ringo, and Cooper DeJean as your outside and slot guys. They've looked fantastic so far.
I was happy with them.
They're young, but they've looked fantastic. And there's a major chip on their collective shoulders, a major edge to all of them. We've seen Keon Mitchell, whether he's talking shit in the end zone after breaking up a pass, or whether he's jawing at his own teammate after he keeps him from picking off his first, I believe it'd be Mitchell's first interception, that it almost was this past Sunday There's an attitude to Mitchell. There's an attitude to Ringo. We saw that obviously on the hit, but we've seen that throughout his young career as well. But for me, like, I don't know. I left Sunday's game feeling pretty good about the defense. And again, it's against the Cleveland Browns. It's against Deshaun Watson. I get that. I don't expect this to be a top 5, not even really a top 10 defense. But I do think that, as this team continues to grow through the season, and for the young players especially, that's pretty important. I do think they're going to build on success and see more and more of it. The biggest thing that I continue to need to see is just an acceptable pass rush. And the more that can develop, and potentially if there is a player added in at any point, which obviously it can't be Hassan Reddick via trade, but if there is a player added at any point, I would love to see that, and I would love to see them build on this pass rush overall.
This is the best pass rush that we've seen all season because there was 5 sacks at the end of the day here. Now, does that speak down to the Browns' offensive line? Yeah, probably. But at the end of the day here, production is production. 5 sacks is 5 sacks. We hope to see it, kind of maintain its pace, or at least, be there against better offensive lines. But what I will say is, seeing who had these sacks here, Cooper, half sack, Josh Sweat, full, Nolan Smith, full sack, Huff, half sack. We talked about it. Jalen Carter, full. Milton Williams, somebody that I've said that's a player to watch on defense a few times this season, half sack, and he had a half sack with Thomas Booker. These are not necessarily, these names that you would, be writing home to talk about all the time, unless you're talking about this Georgia Bulldogs, kind of front here, which I don't think that they're necessarily on fraud watch. I think that, there is a little bit, I like to use the term meat on the bone still. If they can do this and keep it up the pace for remaining of the season, let's just say I would like to see 5 to 6 more sacks from that Georgia group, that I don't think they're on fraud watch. I think they're kind of catching up to the pace here.
Yeah, I mean, it's still kind of a long road, for me, but I do think that there were definitely some signs of encouragement. And kind of like you said, it's a little bit across the field, right? We've already talked about Ringo and Dean, who, aside from that missed tackle, did have a pretty solid game. For me, what I want to continue to see, and you touched on it, is first of all, Jalen Carter has to be the superstar of this defense.
Right.
That is, like, by default, he has to be the superstar of this defense. So I need to continue to see that. It's extremely difficult to do that when you're getting double and triple teamed every single time. So how exactly do you go about that? I'm not quite sure. Duck brings up a good point about another Georgia Bulldog, talking about Jordan Davis only having 25% of snaps. It is a little light for him. There could be, reason why. The one thing that I do see when I look at this Cleveland attack is that they're not as much of a running threat, right?
Right.
So obviously Nick Chubb is still injured. He's coming back next week, but he missed this game against the Eagles on Sunday. You have a team where you're not necessarily worried about their running attack or their passing attack. However, I do think that it was wise to get some more pass rush. Oh yeah, Ron, right here. Just
Ron, I look at it right in a way, yeah, exactly as you said it, and the way that Ron put it, I think it's perfect.
It's perfect. Yeah, he wasn't afraid of the run. He wanted to. I completely agree, Ron. I couldn't agree anymore. It's just an opportunity really for you, and I think it's an opportunity to get the confidence going in the pass rush group, right? So that's something else that you have to build as well. Now, you look at a guy like Brandon Graham. You don't have to motivate Brandon Graham, but a guy like Bryce Huff, you think he's not necessarily doubting himself with the way that his season's gone. You're getting a guy like Josh Sweat going. That's obviously always good to have him get like a little bit more confidence. And I think he's been getting a little bit better and better as the season's been going on. Obviously, he's not used to being a full-time player, but you want to see. You're going to need that production out of Sweat again, just by default. So, continuing to invest in the pass rush, I'm perfectly confident in that. You look at this game against New York. Their backs have actually been half decent. I mean, Singletary has been okay in and of himself, and they got a rookie, and his name is escaping me at the moment.
Oh, Tracy, right?
Yeah.
You're talking about the Giants? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So Tracy, when he has, when he has an actual hole in front of him, when he has a legitimate hole in front of him, he will hit that thing, and he is fast, right? And on top of that, he's a good pass catching option as well. So for Philadelphia, you got to clog the holes. The great thing is that he's not really much of an outside guy. So Philadelphia's problem against the run has been setting the edge. Don't have to worry about that much in this game. I think we're going to see more of an opportunity for Jordan Davis in this game. I wouldn't even be surprised if there were a couple snaps that you had Davis, Carter, and Milton Williams there at the same time. So for me, it's really just going to be about containing Daniel Jones, obviously. It's going to be about stopping that run, and we'll talk more about this on Saturday. But on top of that, you're then going to have to most likely game plan for Malik Neighbors as well. So what do you do as far as the defensive line? Do you have that pass rush opportunity? Yes, no, maybe so. But I would risk it and continue to try and use that focus on that pass rush if I were Vic Fangio, because the success that you saw against Cleveland, obviously that's not necessarily going to carry to every team. And if it works against the Giants as well, that doesn't necessarily mean everything. But if you do have the opportunity to build confidence and, to build the confidence of your pass rushing group, that's what I'm looking to do right now.
I have Daniel Jones as the backup of my fantasy team, and he will not be starting because I do not believe in the composure of him, even against a defensive line that hasn't created such a pass rush, pass rush stability there, I say, all season long. So I think you're right.
I have no backup, and I have a bye week for my quarterback next week. I would still not have Daniel Jones on my fantasy roster.
Better pick up Trevor Lawrence, brother.
I'm working on it.
So yeah, while we're talking about the pass rush, let's go for Brandon Graham and him backing up the 2022 version of Sirianni that apparently showed up on Sunday. From what we're seeing, right? First off, let's just take it from the very first impression, and then we'll build up to what we're understanding now. The very first impression is you see Sirianni getting cocky, even with the home fans. And granted, on TV when you're watching the game, you don't really know what's being said. You don't know. You just see Sirianni popping off in a 20-16 win against the Browns. So first impression is, why is he popping off? It's not impressive. It's, whatever. How do you feel about this, Zach? And we'll go into the context that we are at least able to find with a grain of salt.
Yeah, so, I knew I was going to be hitting the bird game pretty hard by this time. But what I will say is, as far as Nick Sirianni's involvement with the fan, I don't think that there is any capacity in which that you could use a word like good to define it. I don't think that there's any benefit to be had. I don't think there's any positivity that could come out of it. At the same time, I also think that it's vastly overblown. And I think that the reason that is because it doesn't happen that often. And the opinion of Sirianni is not overly high for good reason in Philadelphia at this moment. For me, and this applies to a lot of the conversations going on with Sirianni from this past week, I would much rather continue to pick apart the terrible decisions that he's made on the field as opposed to focus on him yelling back and forth at a fan, and having his kids on the which
I think that's a little bit of a lowbrow maneuver, but go ahead.
I've gotten in a lot of arguments about this.
Yeah,
with a lot of different people. Honestly, it's the reason Brian's not on the show today. He's in a ditch dead somewhere.
No,
we fought, we made up, we're good.
He's a Giants fan.
He's fine. Brian is fine. He was in the chat. You all saw it. Can't fake that. He's obviously fine.
There was no video of him.
He's fine. He's fine. I can't even believe you would suggest that I orchestrated his name to pop up like that. But Brian's fine. Me and Brian are both fine together. But I will say, as somebody who is in these situations where you're in those media rooms, I don't care if somebody brings their kids out. And this is something that, in my experience, plenty of people have done before. Now, I've had other people in similar positions of myself say that they feel like it's different when it's a player versus a coach who doesn't. I don't get that. I have yet to have anyone who actually voiced the argument behind that. They've just said the concept of it. And when asked, they didn't have an answer. But what I will say is, I do understand, Brian brought this point up, the idea of wanting to protect your kids and not bring them up in that situation.
That's what I think.
Fine reaction to have. I think that's a fine argument. I think that's a fine reaction to have. I think that's sensical. I think that's logical. What I don't care for is when you have members of the media who consider that disrespectful, or they consider that an attempt to shield them in a way that you are thinking that you're preventing questions from being asked, hard, legitimate questions from being asked. And so the reason why I see that, a couple different, fold out, I'll get to each point here. In terms of it being disrespectful to members of the media, I want you to bend over. I want you to reach real deep and collectively pull that stick out of your ass. There are so many people I've met cross sport, and it is not everyone in the media, mind you, but there seems to be a couple people in every sport, it's Philly, it's national, it's everywhere. And whether it's an us and them mentality with the fans, whether it is feeling like players are being disrespectful because you have to wait a little bit before you talk to them. Listen, as much as the case is for these people that they are privileged to play a game for a living, to coach a game for a living, we are blessed, we are privileged to write about a game for a living, right? So don't take yourself too seriously. Don't take the situation too seriously, all right? Accusing somebody of using their own child as a shield, it's a heavy accusation, right? And on top of that, to put yourself in such a high position that you feel disrespected just because a kid's in the room when you're trying to work, just get over yourself, flat out, honestly, all right? And the last thing that I'm going to say on this, and I'll turn it back to you, Eric. If you feel that you cannot answer or ask a question with a kid present that you would not professionally without that kid present, you got to reevaluate how you do the job. Like, I don't understand what question you would ask with the child present versus not. It's not like you're going to say, walk up to Nick Sirianni and it's like, hey, Nick, do you feel like you're a loser? Do you feel like you're a failure as a person? Yeah, you're going to ask that not in front of his kids. Maybe you wouldn't ask that in front of his kids. What are you going to ask in a professional setting? You're not going to ask, well, did you actually call a defensive play for Vic Fangio? You're not going to ask that because his kid's around. You're not going to ask, Nick, this offense continues not to get going and you continue not to score in the first quarter. Are you not going to ask that because his kids are around? What the hell are we doing that you feel like the presence of kids? Joel Embiid has brought Arthur in many times. Gershon Yabusele just brought his kid in after the Sixers' first preseason game against the New Zealand Breakers. Like, there is
Drew brought his kid in.
There's no situation. Paul George had his kid at media day where I feel like I can't ask a question because the athlete or the coach's kid is present. I'm not formulating questions with the ideal of, well, there is potentially something risque in my question that I can't say in front of these kids. And I know I said that was the last thing I was going to say, but I do have one more thing to say about this, and this is at Sirianni. Right. If you're going to bring your kids out on the stage, you better act like your kids are there, right? He absolutely got overly combative. He was the one cursing up the storm. Like, you don't have the media members cursing out there. He's the one out there cursing. So for me, Nick Sirianni also, and this is another stage, everyone's always talking about he has to mature. I don't really care as much if he's jawing back and forth with a guy from Philly. Honestly, like, I think Philly fans love that. If they're the person involved, if they're the person who's jawing with a player, jawing with a coach, you look at that person after that interaction and they're smiling ear to ear. My bigger issue is if you're going to make a cognitive decision, not an emotional decision, a cognitive decision to bring out your children, Act like your children are there. That's my big problem with Sirianni.
That's 100% true. I do feel that if that's going to be the case where he's getting combative, that I think that's where the idea of the whole shield comes from, where he can be combative, but it's maybe not like it's unprofessional, so you can't be as combative back. Maybe.
I mean, you can
I don't
argue
know
that
if
in a
that's
general sense, though, too, because there's always historically been that kind of wall in between what you can say to a coach versus what a coach can say to you. Doc Rivers said so much disrespectful shit to members of Sixers media when he was here in Philadelphia. And there's always that kind of wall where it's like, well, the journalist can risk his job if he goes, blow for blow with Doc Rivers. That's not the case for Doc Rivers. Doc Rivers can talk whatever he wants, and he's fine. He's got his paycheck at the end of the day. So that applies with or without kids. That's just the nature of the business.
But I will say, and the point that I was going to bring up originally, but I'm not going to anymore because you nailed it, is the point that if you have something to say to coach that you're not going to say, all of a sudden because the kid's there, I don't understand that, because it is your point that it is your job to ask the question, hard or not, whatever it may be. Like if it's a softball of a question, then it doesn't really matter. If it's a hard question and then all of a sudden someone gets combative, chances are you asked the right question. So you did your job and then you step off. That's how it goes. You got the quote, you move on, you got the feature.
Can I say one thing about softballs? Duck brought up softballs. Let me talk about this for a second here. And I mean no disrespect to the Sirianni family. I mean no disrespect to his children. They are kids. Did they look like they were paying 100% attention to what was going on? Did they look like they understood the inner workings of the conversation that was being had? No, they were kids. They looked like they were bored. They looked like they were happy to be out there with their dad. It's the same, like it's the Riley Curry stuff. That's just how kids are. You're not going to have a kid who all of a sudden begins to question the ability of their father because a freaking guy from a newspaper in Philly or from a website in Philly says, Nick, this offense continues not to get going. What are you going to do to fix it? Because you haven't fixed it yet. There is no hardball question that you can ask that you could not have asked in front of the kids. At this point, like even if you were to say, ask a question around job security, like Nick Sirianni's kids are young enough that they don't really even understand what's going on in that situation, right? And also, if you're talking about job security after the bye week, I just think that and after a win, mind you, as well, I just don't think that you understand how and when to ask questions. Like, you can press a guy about job security, but you have to remember the fact, I get it was an ugly win, and you don't have to celebrate that win, but after a win, there is no question so daunting that you can't ask it in front of his children. And I defy one person to give me a legitimate question that you cannot ask in front of his children that was appropriate to ask either way.
I think the job security stuff comes up in podcasts as banter, more so at the end of the day, versus like a sensible question that you would ask to a coach. And there is a difference between the two. One's are talking points amongst the fan base, and the other one is a professional. You understand the game because you're in the room type of deal. But moving into, I guess, the context of what was going on, it's based on, again, take it with a grain of salt, because we found it on Reddit, right? And this is coming from the account Eagles Nation. We brought this to light. That's where I found it on Twitter. So shout out to them. The fans who Nick Sirianni was yelling at after the Eagles win posted his side of the story, context on Reddit. I began to yell, if your star running back gets 5 yards and first down, you give him the ball again. Run the ball, which Zach, playing off of plays, like you mentioned earlier, I think that's the context of where that lives on. Now, Nick turned around and gestured for me, that's the person who was yelling that in the crowd, to calm down, and said something to the effect of, "We will, don't worry, I'm on it." Fast forward to the end of the game, Nick came over to the area and began saying, I told you we would run. I told you. Admittedly, this is paraphrasing because I had indulged quite a bit at this point, which, to be fair, it's Philadelphia and the fans, and that's absolutely part of the whole gimmick. The point being, it was not unwarranted, nor was it seen as aggressive. Rather, he was making the point to let me know that he followed through. Which, at the end of the day, whether we find that the yardage or whatever the end result there, as I mentioned earlier, 18 carries. That's not necessarily not running the ball. It's better than what we've seen before. So if that's the context here, quite frankly, I have no problem with it. Now, if it was different where he was, talking his talk and it was unwarranted, then that would be completely different context. But if that's the context and that's 100% of it, then it's different than what we've seen in the 2022 Sirianni, where he was, having this battle with the away crowds for the most part. And if Brandon Graham just wants Sirianni to be himself, and if that's the mojo, and by the way, I would roll with Brandon Graham's take on this because he kind of is like the Jedi out of all of this, Eagles roster.
He
might
be an Eagles coach someday too. You never know.
I agree, and that's kind of where I'm going with this. Like, not as a matter of him just being the leader, but I mean, with how many coaches, like we've seen the D'Amico Ryans become a head coach, right? If he Brandon Graham wants to follow in the same thing, because I have no problem thinking that he would be successful at it. And I think it's because he understands the emotion and, the production and the balance of the football game.
Yeah, I definitely see your point there. As far as, I mean, again, like you said, kind of take the Reddit thing with a grain of salt. But as far as that kind of idea of it being about the running attack, they started handing out the ball to Saquon Barkley, was the first play of the game. And then there were 3 straight incompletions. So, like, from the fans' perspective, I do understand that, where it's like, well, you're not setting the tone of the game. And we've talked about that a lot. You're not scripting these plays in a way that's conducive to success. You're not putting your team in the best position to succeed. You want to be able to ride your running back early and late in games, right? And that's not what's happening there. Based on what I saw of the Sirianni video, I think it does make sense that he was jawing with a fan about not running it could be about anything, obviously, but I could see that scenario making sense as to why Sirianni reacted that way. It seems very much like, see, it worked out. I know what I'm doing. And it's, I won't say it's necessarily friendly, but I don't think it's particularly venomous as well, right? Now, as far as Brandon Graham and Jalen Hurts doubled down on this as well, the team wanting Nick to be Nick, listen. Sorry, Ron's describing what I made for dinner tonight, and I don't know what's going on.
They're talking about soup, and it's soup season here too, so I'm kind of
that's literally what I made tonight. It's crazy. No, but when you're talking about Nick Sirianni being himself, right? We are at a crossroad in his career in Philadelphia, and it seems as though either he's going to answer the questions around him, or he's no longer going to be the head coach after this season. It is possible that he somehow hangs around and people still don't feel comfortable about him. We saw that this past season, but more likely than not, those are going to be what happens. Either he's not going to be here anymore, or he's going to have another moment to act like he did to that fan and say, look, I know what I'm doing. So if that's the case, if I'm Nick Sirianni, I would much rather go down with the ship being true to myself, right? And if I am the Eagles organization, I don't necessarily want a guy trying to completely change his personality mid-season, change his mindset mid-season. If you don't feel like Nick Sirianni is good enough, that's fine. I don't have necessarily an argument against that. I think looking back, the Eagles probably would not have hated the idea of moving on from him last year, knowing what they know now. That being said, I don't think that you're just going to wake up tomorrow and Nick Sirianni is going to have a completely new scheme and the team's going to start calling every play that you would want them to call. That's not realistic, right? So if you're going to have the situation, instead of Sirianni becoming a fugazi person and it lasts however long it lasts, even if you like it, it's not built to last because it's not him. Let him be him, and he either shines bright or he burns out, and the Eagles move on. That's where I'm at with this team. That's where I am at with him as a coach. I don't think it's going to work out long term if you press me for an answer, but I think it makes much more sense for him just to be him through the end of the year as opposed to, trying to not step on anyone's toes and trying to be someone that he's not. And it's most likely going to come at the sacrifice of this season's success. That's the bed that Jeff Lurie and Howie Roseman put this team in. So that's the thing I feel like can't get lost on anybody. Everyone's so ready to blame Sirianni, who obviously deserves a lot of blame. But this is a situation that Jeff Lurie put this team into, put this organization into. So you want to look at a negative situation and at least be able to say, hey, I learned a lesson. And hopefully that's the case for Philadelphia if this does not work out, which it does not look like it's going to.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a recurring situation, and my thing is I'm not so sure how much it's changed. So maybe the locker room is saying, hey, go back to the 2022 version of yourself because clearly, I think by now week 5 of this season, we would have expected and seen a change if it was going to happen. I think, and also, not trying to, sit here and guess what's going to happen with Sirianni. I think I've relayed the idea, especially after agreeing with Brian based on his takes from last season to this season. And I've went on record saying that is I don't know that Sirianni is going to be in Philadelphia after the season. And I think Duck brought up a fantastic point here is Sirianni probably does have to get to the NFC Championship to keep his job at this point because winning is a cure-all, isn't it? So that's, as far as that's all concerned.
I mean, everyone thought that Jalen Hurts was a top 3 quarterback in the NFL because they were winning, right? So obviously he was displaying certain talents that he's not at the current time, but there was no controversy around Jalen Hurts because they were winning. There was no controversy around Nick Sirianni because they were winning. Like, that's what cures everything. And if the Eagles won a little more last year, we probably never even reached this point at all. So, perhaps winning is going to cure it for Philadelphia. Their upcoming schedule, is not, I would say it's not completely daunting. Obviously the Giants, division games you never truly know, but I feel relatively confident about that. The Bengals game that was just moved up to 1:00. I don't fear the Bengals, if I'm being honest with you. I don't fear the Jaguars, certainly. I don't fear the Cowboys.
Trap game.
Potentially, but I feel like they're even enough that maybe even a trap game might be like too far of a concept. They could certainly lose it. But I don't have a fear. When you look at some of the other teams in the NFL, like in past years, you feared playing the Kansas City Chiefs.
Right.
Even right now, just based on the way that they're built, I'm a little afraid of playing the Baltimore Ravens, which they will later this year.
Right.
A team like Cincinnati, I don't really fear it, man. It could easily be a loss. It could easily be a win. That's just the way I feel about it.
I think a lot of us, fan base, whatever it may be, even us on the show, clearly, we are conditioned to look at a schedule and go, and then we did it at the beginning of the year, right? Where I said 14-3. We got one more loss, baby, to go through the rest of the season. Listen, it's not. We're at a point with this team where we cannot overlook anybody because who saw us losing to the Falcons, right? Like things like that, and
legitimately, yeah.
It's one of those things where Washington is still finding ways to win, man. And who would have thought that? It's a weird season. And it's one season where it's like, Philadelphia needs to get right and needs to get right consistently, but it can't be, hey, look at us go against a streak of teams that, otherwise this season aren't getting right. it always will come down to how do you play against teams above 500? How do you play against teams who are playoff contenders? Playoff contenders, like a playoff berth, not like an NFC East or AFC East or whatever it may be. Playoff berth. Because last season, you go against, you're thinking, oh, the Buccaneers with Baker Mayfield, it's going to be a challenge, but you go into that game and I don't know, like, did people think that, it would be a blowout? Like it would be looking that bad? I don't know how many people thought that. I definitely didn't think it would be easy. But I don't think that any game's easy this year. And that includes teams that aren't really, I would say playoff bound.
So I'm actually looking at the schedule now, and you talk about games against teams over 500. I may have miscounted. I believe that Philadelphia only has 4 more games against teams that currently have a record over 500. That's the 2 Commanders games, the game against the Ravens, and the game against the Steelers, who I think most people would say their defense is legit, but I think most people would say that that team is probably a Fugazi contender. So with that being said, I mean, listen, we can talk about contention and postseason aspirations in terms of what you're going to do in the playoffs. I still have a lot of reservations about that.
Yeah.
To me, based on the schedule, this still looks like the playoffs are firmly in sight and could easily be in hand for Philadelphia. Now, they've obviously shockingly let us down, like against the Atlanta game that you mentioned. But if they are able to at least get it together enough, I don't know. I mean, 13-3, probably not. But, you can still be looking at a more than a double-digit winning season.
And part of that still is, again, I mean, everything you just said there's only 4 teams, including the 2 Washington twice, right? So really 3 teams that are on the schedule 500 or better this early in the season. To me, I look at that and say, A, it's early, it can change, and B, yeah, if they steamroll this rest of the schedule and they don't, let's say sweep Washington or beat Washington, which granted, I think they do. I think they, at least at this point, Washington has my attention of being a more improved team. So is there a possibility to sweep them? I always think so, but at least split with them, I'd be fine with. But then you get to, what was it? Baltimore, you're saying?
Baltimore and then Pittsburgh, yeah.
Yeah, so Pittsburgh, I think, again, it's, like when this Sunday, it's going to be, Jets and Pittsburgh. In my mind, I think that's like the first game or the first team to get 9 points wins. Like, I don't see too much there to really worry about. But at the same time, that's my blinders, right? Because if you're going against teams that you're saying, they were saying like, oh, like we should beat. There's so many teams that you should beat that it's like an easy. Just in the context of what we just said, it's like an easy parlay to go against teams that you probably shouldn't beat and you haven't really been tested. So that's even to me more terrifying. Where it's like, okay, what is this? If the Eagles get in the playoffs, are they a one and done again? Like you're still having that conversation with yourself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the thing is that, and Steve brings up, he loves the optimism, but doesn't think he sees
that's
how bad we
are. No, I agree. Steve.
I think there's a point to that. But what I will also say, the NFC has been bad, right? And so I'll get to the Eagles' potential playoff performance a little bit later on. The Lions have been fine, but they just had a major injury that they suffered. You look at some of these other teams around the NFC, the 49ers are not the 49ers. The Seahawks are not intimidating. The Vikings are somehow 5-0, and I still don't really believe in that. The Chicago Bears are an absolute farce at 4-2. Absolutely ridiculous. The Green Bay Packers, Philadelphia already beat. And despite the fact that the Falcons and Buccaneers have both beaten Philadelphia, and I think the Buccaneers especially are the toughest matchup for Philly, they're not exactly world beaters either, right? So I say that just to say, I don't think that there is that dominant force in the NFC to necessarily worry about, an NFC version of how the Chiefs have been for the past few years. What I will say, however, I still don't have confidence that Philadelphia wins a playoff game
That's what.
I
Yep.
simply feel that they can make it there, which is, and let me make this perfectly clear, not good enough
Right.
based on early season expectations.
1000%. Loud and clear.
All right. Well, I think that we've kind of gone through a little bit of everything tonight. We're a little bit over that hour marker at this point. We will be back on Saturday. 9:00? Am I thinking that right? 9:00?
Let's get in touch with Brian and see what time he wants to do. But I like a 9:00 start because I don't feel like awful. So,
yeah.
Hey, Duck! I did not call us the Dallas Cowboys. I did not at all, because that would mean that we're not competitive literally against anybody.
Duck's just trying to send a parting shot here. Did you hear the Jerry Jones thing, by the way?
Don't care about the Jerry Jones thing. I'm not like, you know what I mean? Like, what are we talking about here?
Oh man.
Here's the deal. With the exception of that Buccaneers game, and granted, you're missing, you're missing a lot of the identity with the Eagles' offense is there.
Yeah.
With the exception of that, if there is a loss, and I hate to use this kind of like an asterisk here, but at least the Eagles have competitive losses. At least that's true. Because you know what, you're right. Lions did lose.
You did say with the exception of the Bucs game, right?
With the exception of a Bucs game, there's competitive loss. Well, I look at that because you go. I'm talking about.
I mean, that's half their losses this year.
In Atlanta, I look at that and I'm like, man, we all know we watch that. I'm just like, dude.
Yeah, it's still there's a little disbelief.
I'm
about
burnt
that game.
by that still.
Yeah, for sure.
But I mean, but at the end of the day, even both of those losses, they weren't 40-something to 9 or whatever it was. I mean, geez,
Yeah, that'd be tough.
That's never happened. It hasn't happened to the Eagles,
Not recently, not immediately recently,
And that Detroit game, it's like, hey, they did lose their star defensive player, and it didn't matter. It did not matter.
No, Dallas has a lot of issues. Not having a second receiver. They miss out on Devontae Adams, which they were never in that race to begin with. He was going back to his old buddy, Aaron Rodgers. I mean, and once the Derek Carr injury happened, there was no other team that he was going to but New York. They missed out on a reunion with Amari Cooper. That was an option for them as well. They did not get that opportunity either. Dallas has a number of holes. That offensive line.
They didn't miss out on that reunion with Ezekiel Elliott, though.
They did not, and they were reportedly saving him for what I can't tell you, because there's nothing to save him for with the way the Cowboys season's going. But we will talk a bit more about the upcoming game for Philadelphia against the Giants. It's going to be a big game. Obviously, a big podcast. Going to have myself. Going to have Eric. I think we might have Morgan. Possibly.
He's coming back on the return. I don't know if it's Saturday, but probably Tuesday.
Saturday or Tuesday. I don't know. But he is coming back soon. And we should have Brian back as well, our resident Giants expert. So we will be able to go into the game. So with that said, thank you so much for sticking around with us, laughing, having a good time, talking some birds, talking soup, I guess, too, which is something that we do now.
We're soup talkers.
But thank you so much for sticking around with us. And, we'll talk to you again come Saturday for a little bit more Eagles action.
Go Birds!
Flippin' the Birds.